Hello everyone, I'm Jordan from Young Australian Opinion, with you today to explore a topic that has been circulating in our media recently, the Israel-Palestine conflict. Watching this story unfold on the news has inspired me to dig a little further into the problem, and I'm here today with you to share my findings. Let us venture to the early 1900s in the region along the eastern Mediterranean, now known as Israel-Palestine, a region encompassing a Jewish population and ethnic Arabs such as Palestinians living in peace. Simultaneously, in Europe, the Zionist movement was gaining momentum, asserting that Judaism constituted not just a religion, but a nationality deserving of its own sovereign homeland. And where should they establish their new republic? Palestine, a territory to which the Jewish people have a supposed indigenous history with. Zionists also claim that their eventual takeover of Palestine is a process of decolonization, a liberation of Palestinians. This is a prevalent idea supported by various types of news outlets. Popular media sources such as the Times of Israel and Newsweek, as well as the official positions of major governments like that of Australia's, have all contributed to this narrative. The manipulation of Jewish identity and the colonial dimensions of Zionism, misrepresented through media biases and supported by the Australian government through political interests, has led to social turmoil abroad and domestic. So let's explore Zionists' decolonization claims with Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement. In 1896, the release of the infamous Judenstaat shook the heart of the Jewish population. In it, Herzl outlined a thorough plan for the colonization of Palestine. How? Well, through joint stock enterprises. That, and I quote, modeled on the lines of a great land acquisition company, though it cannot exercise sovereign power and is other than purely colonial tasks. These words of Herzl's manifested into a number of companies, including but not limited to the Jewish Colonial Trust, the Colonization Commission, Palestine Land Development Company. These companies, since the invasion of Palestine in 1948, has been used to erect a Jewish ethno-state. Within a year, 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly exiled. By 2023, the number has risen to millions. If this isn't a case of neo-colonialism and ethnic cleansing of an indigenous population, I don't know what is. Speaking of indigenous, what does the word actually mean? Despite it being a common word espoused by modern Zionists, people tend to have a limited understanding. The generic social, colloquial abstraction of the word's meaning can be simplified into originating from a certain location. However, this is in fact a highly flawed definition. Native North Americans are indigenous, so are Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders, but we don't call Dutch people of Anglo-Saxon Englishman origins and thus indigenous. So this social definition is when you think about it. When you analyze the groups of people to which the term indigenous applies, you will come to the realization that the term only applies to people that has had an experience with the process of colonization. Now, the definition commonly used by the UN states that indigenous communities, peoples, and nations are those which have a historical continuity with pre-invasion and pre-colonial society that developed on their territory. They form at present non-dominant sectors of society. Pretty clear Israelis don't fit any of those descriptions. However, Zionists still commonly use that false definition to base their argument. Even with the false definition in mind, the Jewish population composition simply doesn't add up. From 1922 to 1944, the historic Jewish population has been proven to be the absolute minority compared to Muslims, with their highest population percentage being 30.39%, according to CJP, which mainly consists of Jewish immigrants, with a staggering average of 91.7% of all immigration being of Jewish origin. Clearly, a small Jewish composition due to immigration cannot possibly constitute Israelis to be indigenous. Now, the effects of Zionism doesn't just occur in Israel-Palestine, but in Australia too. In the heart of Sydney, Australians marched to the streets with the unfurled blue and white colonial flag. Recent Hamas attacks and media spread misinformation are being used as a catalyst to support the Israeli state while concealing their colonial behavior. According to multiple news outlets such as Plus 61J Media, the solidarity marches in Sydney was prompted by the deadliest Palestinian attacks while completely disregarding the crimes of the modern Israeli military. And quote, While we work hard to pay our taxes, we know that Anthony Albanese is sending tens of millions of dollars to fund Palestinian Arab incitement. I think behind the guise of a so-called anti-Hamas protest, the underlying message of extreme nationalism and colonialism becomes glaringly apparent. On the flip side, over 6,000 people participated in a pro-Palestine protest in Sydney, with Melbourne seeing over 10,000 attendees. According to the Daily Mail, the protest was described as a pro-Palestine rally with thousands descending on Sydney and Melbourne, with protesters lighting flares and waving blood-soaked baby dolls. In addition to the rather negative representation, governmental pressure has been disproportionately applied to Palestinian protests, particularly in New South Wales. Premier Chris Minns condemned the Sydney protests, resulting in the pacification of Palestinian demonstrations to static displays, with protesters facing stay-at-home orders. I firmly assert that the horrific treatment of Palestinian protesters is, at least in part, a consequence of the Australian government's political stance and interests on the issue, which ultimately influences media picture. The Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs explicitly declares, might I add shamelessly, Australia stands with Israel, and always will. To bolster this claim, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade emphasizes that the State of Israel is a robust parliamentary democracy. Followed, they highlight the economic ties, stating Australian investment in Israel totaled nearly $1.6 billion. Perhaps the economic ties is the more driving factor in the enforcement of the pro-Israel stance. It is abundantly clear that the Israel-Palestine narrative is far more complex than what most commonly perceive. Examining the definitional and social interpretations of the word indigenous, as well as the historical pretext of colonization, hopefully show the propagandist nature of Zionism. And right here in Australia, misinformation isn't just a distant concern. It is already impacting our societal outlook on the problem. Adding on with the Australian government stance and oppression of Palestinian protesters have overall worsened the issue. It is vital that we examine and critically evaluate the information offered to us as we go through various viewpoints. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, stay curious.